Hello. Yes, I'm Mike. I'm from St George's, and I just wanted to say thank you first and foremost for having me. It's been a great day. I've loved every moment of it so far. And yes, I'm from St George's, and I work in the research arm of St George's. But as I'm sure many of you know, St George's is a national referral centre for lymphedema, and was recently given the accolade, the title of being a comprehensive centre of excellence. In light of the clinical care that we provide, but also the quality of the research that's coming out of St George's. And it's the research side of it that I wanted to talk about this evening. And at St George's, we are looking at lymphedema in a holistic, multidisciplinary, sort of benched bedside way. So we're doing research that goes from looking at patients in the clinic and how effective their treatment is and those outcomes, right the way through to basic biological studies of the cells and the genetics in people with lymphedema, how they vary in different groups of people with lymphedema and people without lymphedema. And then my area of expertise, which is somewhere in between those, which is, as Matt says, looking at new imaging techniques to understand the anatomy and the physiology of the lymphatic system, and again, how that differs in lymphedema. And I don't want to take up too much time because I'm just going to speak after me, but I just wanted to highlight a few of the success stories of the research thus far. So we tend to focus, on the research side at least, in primary lymphodemas, which I'm sure most people here are aware of, but they're the ones where the clinicians think that there's some inbuilt issue of the lymphatics that leads to the development of the edema. So it's not due to, say, cancer therapy or surgery or something like that. And historically, especially, it was often the case that the patients would come in, they would receive their diagnosis of primary lymphedema, but they wouldn't be given any more information. They would just be told, you have primary lymphedema. There would be no real understanding of why the edema developed. I mean, you might get a name, you might hear Milroy, but other than that, you wouldn't really hear anything. But after many years of research in this area, looking at patients with similar symptoms, similar manifestations of lymphedema, which started with the clinicians, again, grouping people based on what they saw, looking at the images that things like my research is generating, and again, looking at those cells and the kind of molecular signals that the biologists see in the blood and the tissue. We've been able to find genes that are now known to be causal of primary lymphedema. So there are now certain genes that if it's discovered in your body, we know that that's probably the cause for your lymphedema. And St George's, the team at St George's has been responsible for at least 7 of those discoveries in the last decade or so. And that's great for us as scientists and clinicians because it gives us more information about the particular patient's condition and why it occurred. But it's also, we think, great for the patients to get a more thorough diagnosis and more information about why they've got the lymphedema that they've got. And also then to be able to take that back to their primary care setting. Because certainly from what I've seen and heard in the last 2 and a bit years that I've been in this field, often it seems like GPs aren't really aware of the condition. So as a patient, if you can go back to your GP and say, I've got this information, I've got this diagnosis, you might be able to get at least spread a little bit of that information and raise some awareness in your local setting. So that's something that we think is really important. And in addition, some of the research we found of understanding why lymphedema occurs has pushed forward, I should say, the research and development of targeted treatments. So I wanted to highlight the case of a chap who came into St George's last year, who had an issue with his gut lymphatics, which meant that he was unable, sadly, to kind of take in nutrients. He was losing proteins and fats and things through his guts. And when he came to St George's, based on his condition, it was anticipated that he would sadly die within 6 months of coming to us. But it's through that understanding of why his edema was, where it was coming from, the biology behind it, that meant that the team at St George's could actually co-opt a drug that was traditionally used for cancer therapies to give it to that guy because of that understanding of what was happening in his body to lead to the edema. And it's 18 months later, and I'm pleased to say that he's still very much alive and kicking, and his condition is improving. And that's just one case, one particular person. but I think it highlights what we really want to be doing at St George's, which is to better be able to understand why lymphedema occurs, so we can diagnose it more quickly, so we can get people in appropriate therapy, and also, to, as I say, to spur on that research to really get to grips with not just treating the symptoms of lymphedema, which is incredibly important, don't get me wrong, but to move to a situation where we can talk about cures, so we can target specific treatments to specific patients and address the type of lymphedema that that person has. And it's only really through the kind donations of people like yourselves that support the charities that fund our research that we're able to move things in the right direction and continue to strive to improve conditions and treatment for people with lymphedema. So yes, I just wanted to say thank you again, Matt, for organising this. My golf was terrible, but I've had a lovely day nonetheless. No, that's, yeah, it was incredibly awful. Is that more accurate? Yes, and to say thank you again for dipping into your pockets and supporting this amazing cause, because it's, as I say, only with your donations and your good charity that we can actually keep moving things in the right direction. Thank you very much. Oh, actually, sorry, before I go, I did want to plug as well. Please do come and find me at some point if you'd like to get involved in the research, because we're always looking for recruits. You know, it can be imaging studies, it can be blood tests, anything like that. So if you'd like to get personally involved, even if you don't have lymphedema, we need to see people without lymphedema as well. Please do come and talk to me at some point and we can exchange some details.
Would you like Mike just to explain briefly what the process is and what's involved?
Yeah, so I
know
can...
David, you've been...
I've done it, it's changed my life.
Well, can I ask?
I can't, yeah, I was going to say, I can't guarantee that for everybody.
Has it changed your life, David? Don't mind me asking.
No, that's fine. Well, I suppose a year ago, I had no hope of any kind of a cure or whatever it was. You know, you kind of have treatment, or your compression stockings, whatever you have, and then I went to see Professor Mortimer. They did MRIs, this and that, and they said there's nothing more they could do at that time, but he didn't want to lose me from the system. So would I be interested in being a case study? And of course, I said, yeah, I'm happy to help myself and any others that will benefit. And from that, they recommended that I had sufficient system that I could be put to Oxford lymphedema practice. And from that, I've had LVA, and now that kind of is still in progress, but it's working. And without being in that system, I would never have had that opportunity. So I thank all the people at St George's for that.
Quickly, if I may echo that, from my personal experience, I did it because Prof Mortimer does a lot of favours for me, and I do a lot of favours for him. And so I said, of course, I'll do that for you, no problem. Many years ago, I was ruled out LVA. I was deemed unsuitable, so I had lymph node transfer and then 2 lots of liposuction instead. Thanks to this advanced imaging that Mike and Prof have been doing, which I was with. I mean, this is the other thing as well, Mike, which I'm sure you said. Prof Mortimer, hour and 10 minutes, hour and 20 minutes, undivided attention. It's like gold dust. And we were in the room for that length of time. And the outcome for me personally was that they'd found channels in my lower leg and in my thigh. That means that I could potentially be a candidate for LVA now, whereas 5-6 years ago, it wasn't the case. So, you know, as David said, just by going along to help, for me and you, has opened up doors and avenues that we would completely have dismissed.
And I think you as well. That wouldn't happen either, because I just put forward to you from Mike, and then now I'm here now.
Absolutely.
Yeah. A new network of people.
So quickly, do you want to explain the process?
Yes, so it's hard to kind of condense it into a short thing because we're doing so many different studies. But I'll speak from my own work anyway, is that we get people into the clinic and we perform 2 types of imaging. So most people, if you've got lymphedema, you might have had lymphoscintigraphy before, which is the kind of clinical standard injection. It's a radioactive dye, normally injected into the feet or the hands or both. And that's great, don't get me wrong, that's the clinical standard. It gives you some information about what's going on. But what we do is we do 2 more advanced imaging techniques as well. So we use magnetic resonance imaging, MRI, and ICG lymphography. which also involve injections into the skin of dyes that show up when we perform our imaging. So for one of them, you sit in a clinic room for an hour or so with normally Professor Mortimer as well, and you can watch where that fluid goes in your lymph system live, and then we take you off for an MRI scan, similar kind of process, injections into the skin, and then we perform that MR scan to give another avenue of looking at where fluid is moving in the lymph system, if it's moving at all. So one of them gives us really great detailed, superficial information where you can see things happening in real time, basically. And the other, the MRI, gives us more of an overall picture of the lymphatics and the lymph. So they're complementary, they work together. So that's what we're doing there. So it's a half day if you do both. Some people come in and also have blood taken as well, or tissue biopsies if they're good enough for that. So then some of those more kind of molecular biological studies can be done as well, looking at the cells and the DNA. So it's you know, it takes a while. People are willing to give their time, but it's really useful for us, and hopefully it's useful for you guys as well.
Is that more for those with secondary lymphedema or?
No, we are seeing, say, predominantly the research that I'm involved with is primary lymphodemas. But really, I mean, we'll take all comers, you know. I mean, it's because we're trying to, because lymphedema is not a monolithic disease, it's not all the same. And it's, as I was mentioning earlier at the table, we need to see people with different types of lymphedema to really understand the differences, why one person's lymphedema manifests in the way it does and another doesn't, and then eventually really to look at those treatments and say, this treatment's going to be valuable for patient A, but it's not going to be valuable for patient B. So no, we'll take anyone.
Any other questions?
I was going to ask if I had LVA as well. Last September, I went back to the office of lymphedema practice for a checkup. And I was expecting that dye test to be done again to just check my lymphatics in case anyone carry that out again. So is that a normal practice? Is that something? Because I was expecting anyway to see whether my lymphatics are starting.
Yeah.
Back to the normal.
I'm to be honest with you, I'm not sure, because it's not sort of, there's no real standard practice for those techniques at the moment. I mean, they're used sometimes clinically in the NHS, sometimes privately, but there's no real standards for how these techniques should be used. And that's something else that research we really need to be moving forward, is to coming up with some standards and guidelines. I would say that if you did want to see your lymphatics again, come on over. I'll sign you up.
Thank you very much. Well, we might see you all night, guys, and have a chat. Thank you very much indeed.
Right.
Before we have a short break before the auction, the prize giving and the raffle, I'd like to introduce you to our third speaker for this evening, Amajit Chauhan, CEO of the St George's Hospital charity that manages the Lymphoedema Research Fund. The highlight of his career so far is writing in chapter 25 of my book, How to Live Better with Lymphoedema, which is available on Amazon and all good bookstores. So seriously, who wrote this thing? No idea. Amajit and the St George's team have been incredibly supportive of my projects, and I'm proud that we can do all of our bit to help raise money to support you. So without further ado, I know Lymphoedema Research and lymphedema is close to all of our hearts. So Amajit, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Mike, as well. I'll explain a bit about who we are in terms of a charity, but also just to say that I was with Professor Mortimer last week, and he wanted to pass on his thanks and regards to everybody to attending, to being supportive. He's those who know him, he's extremely passionate about lymphedema, and he wanted to really make a change within the research field, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. So, as Matt mentioned, I'm the CEO of St George's Hospital Charity. You may wonder why hospitals need charities, because as we all pay taxes for our health services, it shouldn't need that additional investment. But like all things in life, that's not always the case. And we have a outstanding children's service called the NSPCC, but we also have social services. We have hospitals raising money. We have schools raising money, And I think it's important that we recognise, particularly over the last few years, that the NHS has really shone like a beacon for us all. We had to clap for carers every Thursday, and I think the fact that people are willing to give their healthcare service really implies how important the NHS is, and means a lot to us. It's one of those institutions that really is there from birth to grave and will always interact with it in many different ways. Some of them will be joyful, some of them not so. But equally, the reason, as I said, that we exist as a charity to support our amazing health service, particularly St George's, which is a large acute trust in London, covers 2 hospitals, Queen Mary's in Roehampton and St George's in Tooting. Those of you that watch 24 A&E may see it more familiar. It's an incredible hospital, 900 beds and over 9,000 staff. So it's a big organisation. And my job and our job there is to raise money to support the amazing work that takes place there. We benefit each year around 50,000 people, and that benefit comes in a number of ways. We will fund research, as we talked about today, but also capital buildings. We'll fund support for staff and also patients. Particularly over COVID, we did a huge amount to support staff, as you know, that we're working on a day in day out basis, but also patients as well. We funded 150 iPads across the trust to enable families to remain in contact with their loved ones, but also loved ones to say goodbye to those in hospital because patients weren't allowed visitors. So we work in a multitude of ways. What's brought me here and what's brought this charity to Lymphoedema is really about the connection with Professor Mortimer. As you heard Mike talk about the service, it is a centre of excellence, and it's not easy to get that in a hospital trust. We provide some of the best care and facilities for patients with lymphedema, and it's one of those, unfortunately, one of those illnesses that doesn't get the level of research that it deserves, but also it affects many thousands of people. You'll know of British Heart Foundation, you'll know of cancer research, and a lot of money is put into those research areas, but unfortunately lymphedema not, and that's what we want to try and change. Last year, we were lucky enough to work with or merge with another small lymphedema charity, which enabled us to inherit £100,000. Our aim is to raise £250,000, and that's what we think will be sufficient to kick off our research. And our research will allow institutions across the UK to apply for those funds, enable us to actually take some real efforts into finding out what the causes of lymphedema are, but also what the treatments are. We know there are lots of treatments, as Mike mentioned, but equally, the case of lymphedema affect individuals at a different stage and different rates, and not enough is known about that, and we want to change the formula around that. So, as I said, our aim is to raise £250,000. We're probably around 130,000 at the moment. We've done some fundraising of our own, which has been really good for us and good for Professor Mortimer. The aim is to build up a community. And they've done a huge amount of that with your websites. It's been amazing to see how many people globally are now talking about lymphedema and also raising its profile. So this evening is about actually bringing in that extra money. I'm not saying we're going to raise 100,000 tonight, but whatever we bring in is going to make a difference. And you should remember that every small amount makes a big amount. And the hope is that we'll make this an annual event. I think we talked about that. And actually make it grow, get the conversation going, get people understanding what lymphedema is, and also get people to donate. And I think people are very generous when it comes to their health service. People are very generous when it comes to their health, and particularly when you've been affected by a particular illness, it gives you an understanding of what that health service provision is like, what it's like to have it there at your doorstep. So I'll leave it at that. We are going to go into an auction in a minute. Please do be generous. There are some amazing prizes. That book is incredible. I don't know how you're going to get it home, but it's beautiful. And also, we're actually just hot off the press. So for the men's final, there's always a coin toss, being able to choose who's going to serve. And they always get a young individual, a young child to do the coin toss. So we've been, St George's Hospital Charity has been chosen for that. So we've got a young fundraiser. His name is Dylan. He's 14, and he did some fundraising for us because his grandfather and father's treated at George's. So he'll be doing the coin toss and hopefully raising for all of our charity and also lymphedema research as well. So do keep your eyes peeled out for the final. And those that do win the tickets, enjoy yourselves. But happy to take any questions.
It's a tremendous charity, and I know we're all doing what we can to help them complete the sector. So thank you very much for taking the trouble.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now I'm very conscious of time because a couple of you have got to get away. So without further ado, unless you